the RSI Constellation series has long been a favorite in the Star Citizen game. Actually introduced back in patch 2.0 many years ago with the Andromeda being the first variant available. And ever since then, as the other variants came in, the question really is, what is the best variant to use? I've heard a lot of people really liking the Andromeda, but at the same time, there's a lot of Phoenix fans out there. So let's jump into this and actually compare the versions head to head. The Constellation Taurus was the first ship that I actually bought in game. I bought a starter pack and upgraded to it almost immediately. So I am absolutely no stranger to flying the Constellation series, and it's actually probably the ship that I've flown the most out of all of the ships in my fleet to date. It's a solid choice for pretty much everything you want to do, and it's also very clearly favored by RSI, as it is seen as a little bit buffed compared to other ships that maybe shouldn't be that way. But let's break it down and jump into the different variants and look at the pros and the cons of each to help you actually decide which one you would like to fly. Let's get the big obvious thing out of the way first, the design and the aesthetic. Now, as far as the actual design goes, the front portion of the ship in Section A is really identical between all the different variants. Where it really starts to differ is from the cargo area and back. Now, all of the variants, with the exception of the Phoenix, look very similar to what you're seeing here. So you've got a drop-down cargo bay, you've got your missile racks, you step in the back with some components, then you step further into the back where you've got your little jump ship that you can use, with the exception of the Taurus. It doesn't have one, but the Taurus does have secure storage. Either way, they all look very industrial in nature. There's really nothing super special about them. Very functional, very useful. They just do their job. Now, depending on what ship, they do have different size cargo grids or drop-down cargo bays, rather. Now, there's definitely slight variances between each of them, but generally, they all have the same look and feel. Then you get into the Phoenix. Now, the Phoenix has a completely different look and feel than any other RSI ship, in my opinion. The Phoenix really has more of an origin feel to me, to be honest. Now, it really is meant to be the kind of luxury expedition, let's go grab a crew of people and go explore the universe type edition. But it really does have a lot of the creature comforts that you can imagine wanting, including the large windows to see outside. Like in this case, you can see the hangar outside. There's aquariums in almost every single room. This room here even is fitted out for a hot tub, which I guess I took out of the game several week releases ago, but hopefully they do eventually put it back. Now, this is also one of the very few ships that actually has a queen-size bed in it, right? It's really meant to be kind of that luxurious, let's go out for as long as we possibly can kind of ship. It even includes a fully stocked bar, which I know has been mocked up in real life in several cases as well. So when you start to look at the design and aesthetic between the different variants of the ship, I mean, this one really comes down to personal preference today, because a lot of this stuff is not functional. But personally, I'm going to have to give this category to the Phoenix. I love the idea of being able to actually see out as you're flying around. I love the origin look and feel to it. But that being said, it is slightly less functional, I would say, than some of the other variants. Like, for instance, the Taurus having kind of direct access to your cargo bay, and a larger cargo bay at that. Now, in case you didn't know, in the Phoenix, you can actually drop down into the cargo bay here. It's not exactly the most convenient thing in the world, but it can be done. Now, just quickly taking a look at all of the variants together, as you move kind of forward into the cockpit area, you've really got sleeping quarters for your crew. You've got access to some gunnery, depending on exactly which variant. You have different crew guns, of course. And then obviously your cockpit. So the cockpit in every variant of the Constellation has very good visibility. Now, you do have these kind of random bars, I guess, and each variant, that is the only part in the cockpit that really is all that different. Each variant has different bar layout. but generally you still have very good layout. Now, every variant has basically everything you could possibly need, right from food and beverage machines, sleeping for 4, bathroom, gun lockers. The cargo bay is actually designed to hold an Ursa in most cases. So you can actually fit an Ursa rover in there. You pretty much fit a rock in just about any of them as well. So they're very well equipped ships, regardless of the variant that you actually get. Now, the big variance between the different ships is actually the cargo space that you get on each, and I'll cover that off in a few minutes here. Now, as we jump over into performance and capabilities here, each of the variants has the same SCM speed right now, at least in release 4.2, as each of the other ones. So they all have about a 200 SCM speed, which is actually quite on the high side, I'd say. Now, apparently this is actually being nerfed by about 10%, give or take, depending on the variant, as we move into release 4.2.1, with the slower variants going at 180 SCM, the faster variants going at 190 SCM. But that being said, I don't think it's really going to make that much of a difference, but it does when you actually start to compare it to other ships like the Starlancer TAC, for instance, or the Starlancer Max. So just keep that in mind if you are considering purchasing this ship. Now, as far as maneuverability goes, each of them has pretty good maneuverability. Now, again, I think that's actually getting tweaked in 4.2.1. So I'm not going to dive too much into the exact specific numbers on it because it's probably just going to change anyway. But they are all largely comparable to one another. Now, as we jump into the health pool, this is really where we start to see some big differences, with the Andromeda and the Aquila both having 180,000 HP, but the Phoenix has 160,000 and the Taurus actually only has 129,000 HP. Now, it is important to note that each of these has the same weak points: the neck, the nose, the body, and the tail, sitting at 20,000 hit points each. Absolutely the weak point compared to the rest of the ship. Now you come into the cargo space. This is where it gets a little bit interesting because they don't really line up to the health pool like you would expect them to. So you have 96 SCU in both the Andromeda and the Aquila. Phoenix only has 80 SCU with the smallest cargo grid of all 4, and the Taurus comes in at a massive 174 SCU. Now in the Taurus, in all fairness, that does include some cargo space in the back that's secure that can't be scanned, but it's also incredibly difficult to actually use that with the new cargo boxes, so I'm not sure that that should really count. Now, you can use it. It just is a bit of a challenge, to be honest. But again, it is there and almost double the size of all of the other constellations. This brings us to components. Now, the components between the different variations of the constellations are actually very, very similar to one another, with only really the Aquila variant really differing in any way, shape, or form, and it's not really all that meaningful of a way. So all of the different variants have 2 size 2 power plants, 2 size 2 coolers, 1 size 3 shield, and the only variance between them is the amount of quantum fuel that they can actually store. Now, most variants can store 4.1 SCU, with Aquila being the exploration version carrying 5.6. Now, in the grand scheme of things today, it doesn't really matter. There's enough quantum fuel in my Taurus that I can go across Stanton all the way to Pyro and back, which is really all you actually need. Now, I'm sure as the game progresses and as we start to get larger star systems, this actually will make a difference. But again, in the release today, it really doesn't. This really brings us over into the weaponry that each of the different variants carry. Now, largely they are very, very similar, to be honest. Pilot controls 4 size 5 somethings. The Andromeda and the Taurus by default are laser repeaters. The Aquila and the Phoenix by default are M7A cannons. Now, some variants have 28 size 1 missiles. All variants seem to have, the exception of the Phoenix actually, all variants seem to have 24 size 2 missiles. Now, the only real big difference here is the Phoenix also has a size 1 PDC. Now, that actually makes a pretty big difference, just because it gives you an unmanned turret that it's like having an extra gunner on board. Now, every variant also has 1 or 2 dual size 3 turret on it as well for a crew member to actually man. What does this actually mean? Quite honestly, it really boils down to every variant of the Constellation is very well equipped. Now, there are some that are better equipped, but they serve different purposes actually, so that would make sense. There are some that are not as well equipped, but again, you don't necessarily need it for a cargo hauler like the Taurus. So since this is a comparison, I do kind of have to pick a winner here. I would actually pick the Phoenix. I think the addition of the PDC, as well as the stronger pilot weapons, really sets it apart from the other variants of it. Now again, that's just in terms of actual guns that it has on the ship, but the Phoenix is a very solid ship in that regard, which is a little bit strange given the purpose of the ship, but I mean, hey, it is what it is. Now we move into the cost and value comparison category. This is a very difficult category with the Constellation series because all of the variants are actually very similar to one another when it comes to the jobs that you can actually perform in each of them. You can perform bounties in each of them, you can perform cargo missions in each of them. Now, some of them will lend themselves slightly better. That doesn't mean that you can't still perform those same actions. So the only one in this category that I think really sets itself apart is actually the Taurus. It's actually the reason that I personally chose it when I started as a startup ship as well. With the larger cargo capacity, it really does facilitate running larger cargo missions, which is a nice way to gain more income in the game. Now, it's still well equipped enough to run most of the bounty missions that I'll ever run. Now, if you wanted something that was a little bit more specialized in it, the Andromeda is probably the better way to go. But the reality is that the Aquila, which is meant more for expedition, and the Phoenix, which is really meant more for like luxury transport kind of thing, that gameplay loop just doesn't exist in the game today. So it does kind of immediately remove those two. The Phoenix, though, would actually still be really good at running bounties, but the lower cargo capacity to me is a huge disadvantage. Taurus is by far one of my favorite ships to this day to go take out for a lot of missions that require you to disable the ship and steal the cargo. That's kind of my favorite game loop to play with it. Now again, all of the Constellation ships in this category are pretty much equal to me, with the Taurus being just a little bit better. It really comes down to personal preference when you're talking cost and value here. This brings us to the conclusion. Now, if you wanted to keep each ship stuck to the role that it is actually designed for, that would probably be a safe way to go when you're trying to decide which ship is the best here. They're all kind of close enough that they are interchangeable, however. So the Andromeda, which is actually meant to be a medium freight / gun ship, coming in at 10 million credits in game, is really a solid choice if you're looking to go out and do the bounty missions where you get to steal the cargo afterwards. The Aquila, which really is an expedition ship, comes in at 12.2 million credits. Now, this is probably not a ship that I would actually choose, at least in the game today, just because the gameplay doesn't really exist to me. Phoenix has always been a favorite of mine just on how it actually looks. I love the luxurious look to it. That, to me, it's almost more Origin than it is RSI though, but I love the way the Phoenix is, and it is very well equipped as far as guns go. So the only downside on the Phoenix to me is the cargo space, and it does come in at almost 15 million credits, which does put it on a little bit more expensive side. Now to me, I started the video saying it, the Taurus to me is by far my favorite. Comes in at the cheapest of all of the Constellation series at 8 million credits in game, very easily rentable in game, or I believe it's 160,000 credits, but it stores a massive amount of freight. Now it is slightly undergunned and slightly underarmed compared to the other Constellation series, but to be honest, you don't really notice it in this release. So in this release, I would have to say that the Taurus is still a clear winner, but the other ones are a little bit more specialized if you're looking for that specialized gameplay, or quite honestly, if you have the money in game to burn and want one for each purpose. Now again, I do need to stress that this really does take into consideration the fact that this review and comparison is designed for the game in this release and for 2, simply because of the fact that there are the expedition gameplay and the luxury touring gameplay that don't exist. So if a few releases down the line they introduce the luxury touring gameplay, that could completely change this comparison. Although I do still think that the Phoenix is a solid choice as well. This really brings up the question, which Constellation series ship is your favorite? Do you have a preferred variant? And if so, why? Let me know in the comments below. I'm actually really curious to see what you've chosen. This has been another ship comparison by Citizen Chaos. Thank you, and I'll see you in the verse.